Courtney and Francis and Kurt and Doc and Sleepy and Bashful and Otto, a teenage millionaire and a shotgun-wielding standoff at Bette Davis's? Let's just go make sense of all that. Once you get to the elevator area up here, it kind of feels like you've reached the end, but no, it is Alice in Wonderland, and we are so far down the hole. Broadview Terrace, it continues for 2 more houses after Elliott Gould's Long Goodbye house, and the last one here was built in 1928. It's very hard to see much of it. 2,400 square feet with 3 bedrooms, and probably has views for days, but a funny couple lived here. Well, I don't know if they were funny, but their story cracks me up. Boyd Cobain, he was Robert Mitchum's stand-in, and he was living here in 1946 when he began a lifelong career as a background actor and a stand-in. And what's so funny to me about it is that his wife was Jane Russell's stand-in. A stand-in couple, like that stand-in porno couple from Love Actually. The house right next to it is really cool, and some of it is visible, but there are better angles down around the corner. Broadview Terrace is finished, and we're now kickstarting Alta Loma Terrace. And the first house, it has a name. It was named for the man who built it, Otto Bollman. Oh my Jesus. Literally staring right at us from Elliott Gould's house. Probably not a sentence ever said before. Anyway, the Otto Bollman house. Otto was the head of the Dial Film Company. He was a producer. I think maybe 3 of his company's films have survived. But Otto really loved it up here. He specifically wanted to live on Broadview Terrace, so he had Lloyd Wright, our friend Lloyd, build this house for him in 1923, and you can kind of see through here that the Elliott Gould building really hangs off the hillside. Well, so does the Otto Bollman house on the other side. It's really hard to tell that you're on a mountain from over here. It's one of the early houses here too, a perfect example of Mayan and early modern architecture. It has a very unique L-shaped design to make use of the cliffside by having terraces and balconies and gardens. Absolutely none of which we can see from this side of the house. But that's kind of what makes these places so amazing, the fact that we can't see any of it. Unless you ever get lucky enough to know someone or catch one of these places when they're for sale or rent, you really just have to use your imagination walking back here. Or you can look them all up on real estate pages. You'd just never know how much land these houses actually have if you didn't look them up. Anyway, Otto's films, made in the very early 20s, are nowhere near the level of work of his peers like Max Sennett or Buster Keaton or Chaplin. In fact, Dial Films folded around 1922, and Otto's financial world went into decline, and his house here got auctioned off in 1926. Oof. Otto, he died in 1940 at the age of 86. Isn't it just so cool up here? Are you loving it as much as I am? Again, we are on an actual street, a public street, up in the Hollywood Hills. Again, we're up very high. These houses have just sick views. I love the people over here with the table and chairs on their roof. Amazing. And 10 years after Otto's house was built, this house was built right next door, 1933's B.A.G. Fuller House, built for a philosopher named Benjamin Agthorpe Gold Fuller. Guess when you're as smart as he was, you need 4 names. Does anyone really need Agthorpe, though? Sorry, Agthorpes out there. But he built this house for himself when he moved here to be a professor in philosophy at USC from 1931 to 1941. Prior to that, he was a professor at Harvard from 1906 to 1910, and in 1923, he published History of Greek Philosophy, after which he became a professor at the University of Cincinnati, before he came out here to build this house, which he lived in for 24 years, right up to his passing at 77 in 1956. I know, I'm kind of going fast. It's just, I'm excited and a little overwhelmed for our next house. Just walking up to it, I get goosebumps all over my body. It is, for many reasons, it's very special. It's 2 people I love very, very much lived here. It's the former home of Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love.
Hey!
I've always had this passion to learn about old Hollywood and LA history, but this is different. This isn't something I learned about. This is something I lived. I'm a Gen Xer. I was a little too young to fully grasp Nirvana at the time when they came on the scene. I think I thought they were a little scary at first. You know, the word grunge was new. But I remember seeing their MTV Unplugged. And Kurt just sat on that stool. And I remember thinking, oh, this guy isn't scary at all. He seemed so gentle and so, I don't know, just real. And as I've learned since he died, a day I actually remember where I was when I heard, he didn't just seem real, he was. Kurt and Courtney lived here at, hands down, the most, I don't even know how to put it into words, to be honest. They were living here when Courtney gave birth to their child, Frances Bean Cobain, who, as hard as it is to believe, is all grown up and gorgeous, and she just gave birth to her own child about a month ago with skateboarder Tony Hawk's son, Riley Hawk. Yeah, Courtney Love, a grandma. If you like my show, if you're a fan of my stories or interviews, you can actually thank people like Kurt and Courtney. I'm serious. I'll talk more about that later and them living here in a few. We'll also see a lot more of this house, but I think it's important to go over some of its history first. It's a very interesting combo, this house. It's a craftsman infused with Japanese influences, designed by Daniel Messinger. Not very common, so it'll probably be even more infuriating when you hear that the owner has plans to demolish it. It's over 100 years old, built in 1921. And I think up the steps there, I think that was the front door all boarded up. There's a tale that this house was built for a Chinese actress, but that's not the case. The name on the very initial permit is R. Marguerite Mansfield. Turns out she was a casting director for Roy H. Clum Productions, a small production company on Melrose Avenue that made a couple of films in the early 1920s before dissolving away into the world of the forgotten. Also in that forgotten world is Doris Harmon. When the Great Depression hit, Hollywood suffered too, so Doris decided to steer her own career. She formed the Artists and Models Club in 1933 and ran it right out of this house. Every Friday, they would have an open house where casting directors and agents would come see the models. Actors, men and women, child actors would show up. It was basically, it sounds like an early central casting. And good for Doris, because she ran it for almost a decade. And I don't know if she or any of its members ever lived here or if they just used the house as the headquarters and for the open houses of the Artists and Models Club. The house is over 2,400 square feet with 3 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. And when Kurt and Courtney rented it back in the early 90s, their rent was $1,500 a month. I feel like even back then that was really cheap. And from what I've read and from the photos I've seen, I'm pretty sure that their bedroom was on the top floor of this corner here. That seems to be the main bedroom. Okay, so after Doris and her band of performers closed up shop, a later resident from 1952 made the house a lot more notable, and in some cases it's still referred to as the Philip Ahn house. Philip Ahn was born in LA's Highland Park neighborhood in 1905, and some consider him Hollywood's first Korean actor. He once recalled a story that while he was in high school, he was driving his friend Anna Mae Wong to the set of a film she had a part in. 1924's The Thief of Baghdad. Well, apparently, producer Douglas Fairbanks spotted Philip and asked him to take a screen test. Philip was elated because he supposedly aced it, but his mom put a quick end to any film starring possibility. She said there was no way he was going to go into show business. He was about to graduate, and she wanted him to go right to work, so he did, in a California rice field for quite some time, while his pal, Anna Mae Wong, went on to become a huge star. But in 1934, a decade after high school, Philip Ahn enrolled at USC and began studying acting and cinematography, and it did not take him long to land work. He broke into film the following year in 1935, and he really never stopped working. Ironically, he even starred opposite Anna Mae Wong in 1937's The Daughter of Shanghai. And the two of them were even rumored to be heavily involved with one another, although Philip never married or had any kids. Mr. Ahn lived in this house from 1952 to 1958, and he also had a very successful restaurant out in the valley about 20 minutes from here called Moongate. And look up in that window there, you can see the blind moving. There must be a draft or something open. So weird. Anyway, I was going to say that owning Moongate did not prevent Philip from starring in a ton of movies and a ton of TV shows. He worked up until his death in 1978 at the age of 72, and he was so successful that he was given a posthumous star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1984. Just a couple of years before Moongate closed permanently. I'm just so perplexed by those blinds moving. It's just so boarded up and closed up. Shouldn't be moving.
Hey!
So there are actually a handful of YouTube videos, and I think I even saw a few on Instagram or TikTok of people actually going inside this house, but that sign there says not to, so we are not going to go inside. But I do think we can go around to the back from down here. I think there's a public path down this way from the other side that goes down to the parking lot below. I'm not sure. We're going to check. And also, I couldn't find much about anyone living here in the 60s, 70s, or 80s, but its most famous residents, they moved in here in July of 1992. Kurt and Courtney, a very pregnant Courtney. She gave birth to their daughter, Frances Bean, a month later in August. And just in case you were not around, in 1992, they were all over the place, huge, just in the height of their fame. All right, so I just took a quick peek over this deck up here, and I have to show you the signs that people must come here all the time, literal signs too. And I think down the rock path on the right is the public path. I read it in a comment somewhere, but first I really want to show you as much as I can because I think it's gonna all be torn down very soon, which is very sad. But check out these messages. Rape Me, by the way, is a Nirvana song, just in case you're unaware. And these, they don't look so old either. And honestly, I have no idea how long this house has been abandoned. None. But there is a lot of evidence that people come here. That's the lot that I think has a pathway up here. But first, I don't know if you can see from up here, but there's empty beer bottles and all sorts of signs from what look like recent activity. And over on this side, I read somewhere there's a public path and that it's public, so I'm going to see. But I came here a few years ago to check it out just from the sidewalk where we were, and you could see all through all the giant, beautiful big windows that would just let in so much light. They weren't boarded up. This is kind of new. In the house, it just lit up. And look, it's very easy to want to get mad at the owners of some of these places that get destroyed, but sometimes you just don't know the whole story. It could be termite infested, ready to crumble at the next sneeze. I don't know. But a valiant group of people did try very hard to save it, but from what I have read, it didn't really seem to go in their favor. Also, I want to mention, there's a photo of Kurt. He is in front of one of these big windows, and if you are a fan like I am, it's just surreal to see, which is, why I want to preserve a part of their legacy with a video of this house, because I just love them, both, Kurt and Courtney, just love, love, love. To give you a little reference, let me give you a little context to the time in which Kurt and Courtney were living here. In 1991, the year before they moved in, Courtney's band Hole had released their debut album, their very first album. That's also the year that Kurt and his band, Nirvana, released their second album, Nevermind, which, of course, kicks off with Smells Like Teen Spirit, the absolutely brilliant song that catapulted them into the mainstream world of music and the mainstream world of radio. That song, I know it's overplayed, but it changed the course of music. It killed the metal hair band scene, and an entire genre was born. They were the king and queen of what was now being called grunge music. The press, they just could not get enough of them. They were all over the place.
Hello, 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 hello.
And if you recall, in the very beginning of this tour, when I was leaving the Hollywood Bowl, I was standing over there. Wait, where is it? There, by the People Mover. I'm not sure if you can see it, but anyway, I pointed out across the parking lot to a house, and I said, let's just call it the Love House. Now you know, that's the Hollywood Bowl parking lot, but from over on this side, the trees are blocking most of the view, so it's not as obvious as when we were standing over there. And the craziest thing about it is that it used to all be homes. It was part of Hollywood Heights. Homes and bungalows. In fact, you would leave the bowl, turn right, and there was a street full of homes. They were all bulldozed and destroyed to give the bowl this parking lot. And actually, okay, now this makes sense to me. When I was at the bungalow park, I mentioned that the LA Times incorrectly said that Marilyn Monroe had lived in one of them. Well, now I can kind of see the confusion, because she actually lived in one of those bulldozed homes back in 1933 when she was 7 or 8 years old. We're looking right where it was. Her mother, Gladys, bought the house on what was called Arbor Drive, and Marilyn later recalled taking piano lessons on the grand piano her mom bought for the house. And my friend, well, I don't know if she uses her name, so I won't say it, but she runs an Instagram account and a website that I'm just obsessed with called Before the 101, and she uncovered a bunch of cool photos, including when a 6-year-old Marilyn Monroe, then of course Norma Jean, and her elementary school class, they were selected to perform in the Easter service at the Hollywood Bowl, right before she moved next door to it. Little Norma Jean only lived in the house a couple of years. Her Mom was sent to a mental hospital, and Marilyn moved across the street to a house on Highland Avenue that has also since been bulldozed. So there is no path down here. That comment I read was wrong. I'll check the other side in a minute, but do not come here expecting to find any kind of public path. Also, I was going to say, I'm willing to bet everything that Kurt and Courtney did not know Marilyn Monroe's history with this area. I mean, provided they would even care. Why would they care? But I do, so now you know. But I will tell you, the one thing that Kurt and Courtney did do was hear this area. Because you can hear every single show that the Hollywood Bowl puts on from right here. Very well, too. And I'm such a dork. I looked up the Bowl schedule from 1992, and there weren't that many shows for some reason, but Bonnie Raitt, Morrissey, and Etta James were just a few of the people who performed while the Cobains were residing here. So yeah, do not come here if you're thinking it's cool to walk around here. I did not see any paths, and it seems as if there may be squatters. I don't know. Definitely signs of recent life here. In addition to people who just come to want to be near the spot where Kurt Cobain wrote most of Nirvana's third and final album, In Utero. They even call this the In Utero house. He didn't write all of it here, but a lot of it. I think it's probably my favorite of their albums. Heart-shaped box. Oh, chills up and down my body right now. Just even imagining Kurt Cobain writing right here. And Courtney, she wrote Hole's classic album here, their second one, Live Through This. It's one of the many reasons why that valiant group of heroes tried to get this house declared a historic landmark, but unfortunately it just seems as if that ship has sailed.
I've been locked inside your heart-shaped box for weeks.
Loving Kurt and Courtney doesn't necessarily mean loving some of the choices they made. They wrote 2 phenomenal albums here, but they also created a lot of destruction and devastation for themselves, family, friends, fans. A Vanity Fair article came out implying that Courtney had done heroin while pregnant. The article came out while they were living here, and the LA County Department of Child Services did not like that. They came knocking right here and took Frances Bean away, giving her to Courtney's sister. But the custody battle didn't last long, and Frances was returned here to Kurt and Courtney, but she was heavily monitored. Yeah, Kurt and Courtney, they were addicted to heroin. It's really awful. Courtney has insisted, though, that she quit as soon as she found out she was pregnant and that she had been misquoted in the magazine. She also said that the article put a major strain on her relationship with Kurt and that it added to his depression. They left this house in 1993 for Seattle. They only lived here for a year, but oh, wow, what a year. The whole thing, it's just so tragic. Heroin, addiction. I think a lot of us know people, good people, wonderful people who unfortunately get caught up in that world. I only hope that one day the things that Kurt and Courtney stood for, the stances they took, the speaking out that they have done, the championing of the underdog that those two undertook. You have no idea what it meant to a kid like me, or maybe you do, to hear 2 people of their stature speak out on behalf of people like me in a time where nobody else was doing that. For that, they're heroes to me. They are goddamn heroes, and I hope that all the good that they have done overshadows the drug stigma that goes along with their legacy.
I feel like keeping gay people in the closet with our attitudes and our actions is cruel, and it's tacky, and most of all, it's boring. And I think that we really need to respect each other and ourselves and respect who we are and what we are and not be afraid to be what we are, whether we're gay or straight or insane or Irish. It's 1997 and respecting each other's sexuality is about the coolest thing I can think of, except for maybe legalizing hemp and not wearing fur. I love you, Francis. Good night, Francis.
She has me like a Pisces when I am weak. I've been drawn into your magnetar trap. I wish I could eat your cancer when you turn black.
Believe it or not, this tiny little street was also home to another singer with a voice that it's probably even more iconic than Kurt Cobain's, and she lived right next door, but way before Kurt and Courtney, and we can't see any of it. In fact, you can't really see any of the beautiful homes up on this stretch, but it doesn't really matter because it was renovated after she sold it. And her name was Adriana Caselotti. Yeah, okay, her name's not that iconic, and you've probably never heard it, but you have definitely heard her voice. She lived in this house on the left in the 1960s, but actually started her residency up here in this small white house on the right, way back in the 1930s. She called Alta Loma Terrace home for about 40 years. It was actually across the street from her last house, where Adriana was living with her mother when she made history. Her Italian immigrant parents arrived on the east coast of America, and a few years later, Adriana was born on May 6, 1916 in Connecticut. Then her parents moved her back to Italy for a while, and then eventually out here to Los Angeles in the early 1930s. Guido and Maria, those were her parents, and they were both vocal coaches. They gave voice lessons for a living. And Maria just happened to be the very first voice coach of, none other than Maria Callas. And Guido, he made a name for himself out here teaching, which is why the Walt Disney Company reached out to him in 1934. They had seen 150 singers, but they still hadn't found someone to fit the description of the voice that they wanted. Ageless, friendly, natural, and innocent. It was for a character in what would become Disney's first animated full-length feature film. So Guido said to them, yeah, I have a few students you should see, but also check out my 18-year-old daughter. She goes to Hollywood High, but she's also an MGM chorus girl. She has a really great voice. You should audition her. Well, Guido and Maria, they had divorced the year before in 1933, and Adriana was now living here with her mother. Well, the scouts, they agreed to audition Adriana, and she got the part. She ended up recording vocals for the very first Disney princess ever, a character named Snow White.
Then they're orphans. That's too bad. I know. We'll clean the house and surprise them.
Took a long time for Disney to make this movie. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs wouldn't be released until 1937, but Adriana was still living here. In fact, she lived here with her mom up until the early 1940s. But when Adriana went to the premiere of Snow White in 1937, she was stunned to find out that it was a full-length feature film. She had been told that it was just going to be a little longer than the usual Disney short films, so she assumed maybe 20 minutes. But the 83-minute runtime shocked her because she had only been paid $970 for all of her work. And, that wasn't like today where voice actors can sometimes knock their roles out really fast. She had session after session earning $20 for each one. It's almost 50 sessions. Back then it equated to around 20 grand, which was still a lot, but after the film's premiere, though, Walt Disney just put an absolute halt to Adriana's career. He just didn't want the image of Snow White ruined, he said, so he prevented her from making any sort of appearances. He didn't want her to be on any TV shows. Jack Benny wanted her for his show, but Walt said no. He wanted Snow White heard, not seen, so Adriana's career, it was very short-lived, although listen to this. She kind of anonymously, her work went uncredited, but she continued to record and appeared in two of the biggest films of all time. In The Wizard of Oz, you can hear her sing "Wherefore Art Thou, Romeo" during the Tin Man's "If I Only Had a Heart" number, and then in It's a Wonderful Life, she's the voice you hear singing when Jimmy Stewart's character is praying at Martini's bar. Adriana, though, she sued Disney a few years after the release of the film because they released a soundtrack and she got nothing. She felt she was owed, and she was, but you can't ever fight Disney. You just can't. She lost, but Disney eventually hired Adriana again when she was 75 years old. She re-recorded for them, and they even named her a Disney legend in 1994, the first ever voice performer to receive the legendary status from Disney, and she passed away a few years later at the age of 80 in 1997. And her home at the time, it was a small house on Larchmont Boulevard in Hollywood. I used to drive by it. I sometimes parked in front of it, and I never knew until, I think, a week ago that it was her house. She had embraced her role as Snow White so hard that she had this giant wishing well in her front yard, and she would pose with fans for photos and sometimes let them in her house. There's videos on YouTube. She seemed like a very fun lady, but she never made much money as Snow White. She made all of her money from investments and real estate. She built and owned a handful of houses up here. Seriously, look at the real estate blogs on any of the homes on Alta Loma Terrace, and chances are you'll see that it was commissioned for her, although there were really only 3, maybe 4 houses, and there's about 10 houses up here claiming that they were for her. So take it with a grain of salt when you read those blogs. Snow White and Kurt Cobain, such legends of pop culture, and they shared a street address. And that is actually something that Kurt and Courtney may have very well known. Someone could have very well told them that when they moved in, because, like I said, she lived here for 40 years, and it's pretty common knowledge when you talk to people who know this area. Oh, big wind chimes. All right, so this one on the left, across from the cool fence, has some opposite of Snow White feelings. First of all, Glenn Cleek was living here when he was operating a Pacific Electric trolley that ran over a man in the Hill Street Tunnel. It's unclear if the man was suicidal or what, but it was accidental on poor Glenn's part. Then, a couple decades later, the 2-bedroom, 1,800 square foot house built in 1925, which you cannot see because it's on the other side of the fence here. Sorry, it's the last fence you'll have to look at. There aren't any photos online either. I'm kind of dying to see what the house looked like in 1971. This next story is so silly and so 70s. Sorry, but I can't take your Indian guru seriously if he's 13 years old. But that's what a bunch of weirdo cult members did back in 1971. The Divine Light Mission was, it was a cult. They all bowed to this young guru who some people in India claimed was, magical. Sure, fine, I am all for spirituality, but again, I am absolutely not listening to a 13-year-old. One who is a millionaire driving the fanciest cars, living in the craziest mansions, flying around on a private helicopter. Yeah, this 13-year-old toured the world, and people freaked in his presence. They drove him around in cars draped with flowers. So strange, so weird. He did present himself as this champion of peace, but he created the opposite of that with, this lifestyle of private helicopters and all this luxury. But he came here to this house in 1971 while touring the world because it was one of the Divine Light Mission's 45 retreat houses. They had them scattered all around. They had meetings, prayers, washed his feet. Cult people do weird things. I'm actually kind of proud to tell you that my grandmother back in Ohio, she had not really a side gig. She didn't make any money. It was a passion gig, but she was a cult deprogrammer. She witnessed firsthand what cults do to families, and she helped people get out of them. She repeatedly said to me when I moved to LA, she said, just stay far, far away from cults. I'd almost rather you call me from jail than a cult, specifically one in general. But she never had to worry about any of that with me. In fact, I really can't stand people who make a lot of money off of spirituality or religion, but that's what this 13-year-old guru did. And honestly, poor kid, who were the adults around him to let this happen? And for so long. Time magazine actually did a piece on him when he was 17, pretty much mocking the whole thing, revealing that the Divine Light Mission referred to their guru as the Lord of the Universe. Well, when that got revealed, one of those adults around him eventually turned, his own mom, denouncing his reputation. And as his homes and possessions grew and grew and grew, others eventually started going, what's happening here? And they caught on, and the cult unraveled in the 1980s and eventually dissolved. He's a speaker and an author now. He uses some other name, and I think he's in his late 60s. He's kind of like an early influencer, one of those people whose names you've never heard of in your life, but they have millions and millions and millions of followers, and you're like, what? How? But his were real physical people. Pretty wild. Fences, 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 and more fences. It'll actually start to all open up in a second down here. And down this pathway are another couple homes, but it's across the way on the other side of this brown fence where something fun and inspiring happened. Finally, a fun, happy story. Conrad Huther and his wife Eileen, they celebrated a win of $140,000 in the Irish Hospital Sweepstakes during the last week of October in 1952. A sweepstakes set up to raise money for hospitals in Ireland. Conrad, he was a sergeant in the U.S. Army during World War II. They lived here with their 3-year-old daughter Lynn at 53 and a half when they won that huge jackpot, an equivalent of over $1.5 million today. But it is the house, or actually houses, next to it that I'm really intrigued by. I think I love them. It's a duplex. I'm pretty sure there's only 2 units here, each with 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, but I think I'd love them even more in the mountains or on the beach in Malibu. I do like this one's fence setup, but this red one, it's one of the ones that those real estate sites say was commissioned for Adriana Casalati. It's just not much proof on this one, as there are the other 2, so take it with a grain of salt, although ironically, it and the rest of Alta Terrace have just much more of a Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs vibe. I read a book about Kurt or Nirvana a while back, and I cannot remember who said it, who was quoted, but it was somebody in their inner circle recalling the period in which they were living here. And they talked about, well, they said something like Kurt and Courtney lived in this house and it required an elevator to get to. And after a night of partying, we would go back to their house and they'd never be able to find the elevator key. So we'd have to take a ton of stairs to get up to it. So that tells me that the Cobain's parking spot was not on this side. These are all spots for the homes that we've just seen, but so were the garages we saw on the other side before we went up to see the Long Goodbye house. So from that story, it just sounds like they parked over there because people parking here would not need an elevator key. And remember earlier, after we finished the Hollywood Bowl tour and we were walking on Highland Avenue, and after the Bowl parking lot, I said something about remembering this spot because we would see it later. Well, you're probably recognizing the wall because we are back at the Linda Ronstadt Park. I'll always call it that. Look, I love the other dudes too. Jackson, Glenn, JD, but get back to me when you can sing Blue Bayou like Linda does. Right across from the park on the other side of Highland Avenue, right over there is another parking lot for the Bowl, but it used to be full of homes, and in fact, Alta Terrace used to extend across Highland, and there was a whole other block worth of homes. I thought about skipping this part because to me, it's not really Hollywood Heights over there. It's pretty much Whitley Heights. But if you ever read about Hollywood Heights, there will be two people mentioned in its history. And I didn't want you to be like, why didn't you mention them? So I'll tell it as quickly as I can here, even though it all happened across the street at 6655 Alta Loma Terrace. It was charming. It was almost Disney-like, a beautiful cottage that was built in 1923 for a cinematographer and an upcoming Broadway producer named Gordon Pollock. Well, Gordon rented his home out in 1930 to a mother and her young 22-year-old actress daughter who had just arrived from the East Coast. That young actress was named Bette Davis, and this would be her very first house in Hollywood. Betty even wrote about it in her autobiography, in which she included a photo of it saying, "It was the sweetest house I had ever seen in my life." I feel like I should do it like her. It was the sweetest house I had ever seen in my... So bad. So bad. Well, Betty went on to live in several more houses as her career just catapulted, and a few decades later, it was home to Stephen Anthony, his wife, and their 3 young children. Gordon Pollock had been his landlord as well, but Gordon died in a plane crash, so Anthony was now partial owner of the house. It's a very long, complicated, but fascinating story. But in a nutshell, the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures had a $6 million project on the horizon to build a Hollywood museum, and they wanted to build it across from the Hollywood Bowl. Well, everything was in place to bulldoze and build the museum, with the exception of one big holdout: Mr. Anthony. He refused to sell, he refused to move. In fact, he refused to budge. He was a 33-year-old bartender working at Barney's Beanery in West Hollywood, and he was not about to leave his house. There were lawsuits, and they just went around and around and back and forth for a while. And then on February 8th, 1964, a posse of LA cops showed up at Bette Davis's former home and were stunned when they were greeted by a shotgun-wielding Stephen Anthony. He had barricaded himself and his entire family, which also included some grandparents. There was a very dramatic 7-hour standoff with Anthony, refusing to budge. He said he'd rather die than move. Well, the police, they backed down. They got the Supreme Court involved. They gave Stephen 48 hours to vacate. He still refused. And now he enlisted the help of about 12 Marine buddies of his to guard the property, which they did. I mean, this guy was relentless. I mean, maybe he loved All About Eve. I don't know. But believe it or not, this standoff lasted weeks. It made national news. The press, as well as the public, were having a field day with it. They even dubbed his home Fort Anthony, and everyone was on pins and needles awaiting the outcome. And ironically, on the night of April 13th, 1964, the 36th Annual Academy Awards were taking place, and guess who was watching? The entire Anthony family. They also had their eyes out the window for any possible police raid. However, during a commercial break, when someone went to the bathroom and left the door unguarded, police made their move, and Stephen Anthony found himself staring down the barrel of a shotgun. Longer story short, the Anthonys were removed from their home, and Stephen was released on bail just in time to watch his and Bette Davis's former home crumble away, which he did in person. He went on to serve 6 months in jail for the whole debacle, and the Anthonys eventually moved to Sonora, Mexico. Some considered him a thorn in their side, and some considered him a local hero, but the tragedy of it all, the museum was never even built on the site. There is an old barn from the early days of Cecil B. DeMille in the parking lot, which serves as a small museum, but the Academy's museum, that wouldn't be built for several decades, and it's nowhere to be found around here. It sits down in LA's Miracle Mile, and you can see that in my Miracle Mile story location tour. Just so you can say, you know what? Justin Root showed me every square inch of Hollywood Heights, I thought we'd walk up and I'd show you a little bit of it from the Bulls parking lot and show you some of the land that the houses you just saw sit on. It's so windy today too for some reason, and I need a new wind guard for my mic, so apologies if the wind is too loud. But those are the houses, the ones I said I'd like better in the mountains or on the beach, the one they say Snow White lived in, and the white one next to it there, that is where the Sweepstakes winners lived, but they upgraded and moved somewhere else. Although I would kill to own a small house up there. The Guru house, though, that is the one I really want to see, and it is totally obstructed. And that down there, that's the Bull Museum area, the box office and all that. There's really actually not a lot more to show you on this portion. We're about to completely wrap up the northeast portion of Hollywood Heights and return back to Hightower Drive for so much more. Oh yeah, did you think Hightower Drive was over? Oh no, it has seriously barely begun. We're gonna jump back over this giant hill in a second to see the rest of it, but I just wanted to say goodbye again to the Doris Harmon, Philip Ahn, Courtney Francis, Kurt Cobain house one last time. And see, this is where I read that there was some sort of, path up there that was probably some time ago because it is totally fenced in and you cannot get up there from down here, so don't even try. But now you can see just how and why everyone who's ever lived up there can hear the music from the magical Hollywood Bowl.